Judging a food or beverage product objectively is notoriously difficult, mostly because taste is deeply personal. But when it comes to instant coffee, quality actually leaves a paper trail. To rank these brands fairly, we have to look past the cozy marketing imagery on the glass jars and focus on verifiable data. The specific bean varieties used, the transparency of the supply chain, additive ratios, and independent consumer testing. In the coffee industry, the foundation of flavor starts with the species of bean. Most instant coffees rely on a blend of Arabica and Robusta. Arabica beans are generally more expensive to cultivate, grown at higher altitudes, and praised for their complex, nuanced flavor profiles. Robusta, on the other hand, is hardier, cheaper to grow, contains about twice the caffeine, and tends to carry a more bitter, rubbery note. While Robusta isn't inherently evil, it provides excellent creamer and body when used correctly. Mass-market instant brands often use cheap, low-grade Robusta as a filler to cut costs. Beyond the beans, we have to look at manufacturing transparency. Does a brand disclose where their coffee is sourced, or do they hide behind vague terms like imported ingredients? Independent consumer reports, like those from the Australian consumer advocacy group Choice, frequently reveal that the highest priced jar on the shelf doesn't always correlate with the highest satisfaction scores in blind taste tests. By analyzing these ingredient panels, processing methods like freeze-drying versus spray-drying, and public supply chain data, we can separate genuine quality from clever advertising. This criteria is exactly what we use to build this list, and it means some of the biggest names in the grocery aisle are about to face a harsh reality check. With that criteria set, let's start at the bottom, the brand almost nobody will defend. Walk into any grocery store and you'll find it sitting on the middle shelf exactly where it has been for 40 years. It's cheap, the packaging looks reassuringly old school, and almost everyone has a tub of it hiding in the back of their pantry. It's the quintessential legacy budget brand the coffee people buy not because it tastes incredible, but because it's there, it's predictable, and it costs less than a fancy loaf of bread. But when you actually look at consumer satisfaction data alongside blind taste tests, an odd paradox emerges. These legacy brands frequently rank surprisingly high in consumer satisfaction surveys. Yet they score near the bottom when coffee experts analyze the actual quality of the beans. To understand why this gap exists, you have to look at what's actually inside the bag. Mass market budget coffee relies heavily on Robusta beans rather than Arabica. From a biological standpoint, Robusta plants are incredibly resilient. They contain twice as much caffeine as Arabica and a significantly higher concentration of chlorogenic acids, which act as a natural pest deterrent. This makes them cheap and easy to cultivate on a massive scale. The downside, however, is the flavor profile. Robusta is inherently bitter, sharp, and often described as having a rubbery or wood-like aftertaste. To make millions of pounds of these cheap beans palatable to the general public, commercial roasters use a very specific tactic. They roast them dark. Pushing a bean to a dark or extra dark roast profile essentially burns away the distinct, volatile compounds that reveal a bean's true origin and quality. It masks defects, uneven harvesting, and stale inventory by replacing those nuanced flavors with a uniform, smoky bitterness. So why does it survive? Because human taste preferences are deeply tied to routine and nostalgia. For millions of people, that specific burnt bitter profile isn't a defect, it's simply what coffee is supposed to taste like. The low price point creates a low stakes experience, and when expectations are modest, satisfaction stays high. It's a triumph of industrial consistency over agricultural quality. But while this legacy giant relies on burning away its flaws to keep things cheap, the next brand on our list takes the exact opposite approach. They charge a premium, promise a luxury experience, and yet manage to fail the quality test in a completely different way. Walk down the coffee aisle of any major Australian supermarket, and your eyes are naturally drawn to the premium shelves. You see the sleek glass jars, the elegant matte black labels, and the bold text promising an authentic barista-style experience. These brands position themselves as an affordable daily luxury, charging a noticeable premium over the standard utilitarian tins sitting on the lower shelves. For years, consumers have bought them out of habit, trusting that a higher price tag naturally equates to a superior product. But if you look past the clever marketing and check recent sentiment on independent review aggregators, a completely different story emerges. Over the last year, a wave of negative reviews has hit several of these prestige-positioned brands. Long-time buyers are expressing frustration, noting a sudden change in taste, a weaker aroma, or a distinctly burnt flavor profile that wasn't there before. The common thread among these complaints is a feeling of mild betrayal. People feel they are paying top-tier prices for a product that no longer delivers a top-tier experience. This disconnect forces us to ask a fundamental question. Does premium packaging actually guarantee premium contents? In the coffee industry, the answer is often found in the corporate ownership structures operating behind the scenes. Many consumers don't realize that a high-end brand and a budget-tier supermarket staple are frequently owned by the exact same parent conglomerate, processing their beans in the very same facilities. When a trusted brand begins to quietly decline, it is often the result of corporate cost-cutting or a subtle shift in sourcing to maximize profit margins, relying entirely on old brand loyalty to keep sales high. That ownership question is about to come up again. Keep it in mind. Walk into any major Australian supermarket, and you'll notice a specific type of instant coffee that commands the premium shelf space. It comes in a heavy glass jar, sporting an elegant, minimalist label that practically screams high-end craftsmanship. The pricing matches the aesthetic, is positioned as a luxury, a sophisticated choice for people who care about what goes into their cup. For years, shoppers bought it out of habit, trusting that the higher price tag guaranteed a superior product. Lately, though, if you look past the sleek marketing and dive into recent review aggregators, a very different story emerges. The sentiment around this specific tier of coffee has taken a sharp downturn. Longtime buyers are taking to online forums and review sites to express a distinct sense of disappointment. They are reporting that the rich, smooth flavor they used to rely on has been replaced by something bitter, thin, and distinctly burnt. The contrast is jarring. You have this beautiful prestige position jar sitting on your counter, but the actual experience of drinking it feels incredibly cheap. This raises a fundamental question about how we shop. Does premium packaging actually guarantee premium contents, or are we just paying a massive markup for a clever design? When a brand quietly alters its production methods or sources cheaper beans to protect its profit margins, it relies on consumer inertia. They know you trust the label, and they count on the fact that you will keep buying it out of habit before you realize the quality has slipped. But there is a deeper layer to this shift that most consumers completely miss, and it involves looking at who actually owns these companies. The instant coffee industry is surprisingly consolidated, with a handful of massive parent corporations controlling dozens of seemingly competing labels. When you look into the corporate ownership structures, you start to find that this struggling luxury brand often shares the exact same supply chain, factories, and corporate parents as the budget, bottom-shelf tins sitting just a few aisles over. It makes you wonder if you are genuinely buying a superior roast, or if you are simply paying extra for the illusion of choice. That ownership question is about to come up again. Keep it in mind. The price on the bag says premium, and the logo belongs to one of the biggest multinational conglomerates on earth. You'd think that kind of scale and price point would buy a flawless supply chain, one where every farmer is paid fairly and every bean is sourced ethically. But when you pull back the curtain on global conglomerate coffee, you find a massive disconnect between corporate marketing and the reality on the ground. At this level of the market, you aren't paying for rare beans or meticulous small batch roasting. You're paying for the massive infrastructure it takes to move millions of pounds of coffee across oceans every single week. The problem is that immense corporate scale makes true accountability incredibly difficult to enforce. Independent watchdogs, like the corporate human rights benchmark, regularly evaluate these multinational food giants on their supply chain practices. Year after year, the reports show a troubling trend. While these companies have beautiful sustainability pledges on their websites, their actual tracking of human rights and labor conditions deep in the supply chain frequently scores shockingly low. When you buy a bag from a global conglomerate's premium line, that name doesn't guarantee ethical sourcing. Often, it just means they bought a massive lot of decent coffee and put it in a shiny air package. In fact, third-party investigations into major coffee supply chains in regions like Minas Gerais, Brazil, have repeatedly uncovered systemic issues, ranging from underpaid labor to hazardous working conditions. On farms that supply the very conglomerates claiming to champion worker welfare, it forces you to look at your morning routine differently. Beyond the taste, the acidity, or the roast profile, there's a moral dimension to the daily brew. You have to ask yourself, what am I actually funding with this purchase? Because as it turns out, the illusion of premium quality often masks a race to the bottom in terms of production costs. And to truly understand how deep that rabbit hole goes, we have to look at the sheer market share these giants control, which brings us to the next brand on our list. Up until now, we've been looking at how manufacturers manipulate the actual coffee bean to maximize their profits. But there is a massive segment of the supermarket coffee aisle where the beans themselves aren't even the primary issue. In fact, they are barely an afterthought. When you pick up a box of pre-packaged, flavored instant coffee sachets, the ones promising a cafe-quality vanilla latte or a frothy caramel cappuccino, at home, you aren't actually buying coffee. You are buying a highly engineered chemical mix where coffee is essentially used as a background flavoring. To understand how this works, we have to look at the legal framework governing food packaging. In Australia, consumer law and food standard codes require manufacturers to list ingredients in strict descending order by their ingoing weight. This means whatever ingredient weighs the most at the time of production must sit at the absolute top of the list. If you flip over at typical flavored coffee sachet and look at that panel, the word coffee is rarely the first thing you see. Instead, the top spots are almost universally occupied by glucose syrup, hydrogenated vegetable oil, or straight cane sugar. According to these ingredient panels, actual soluble instant coffee frequently makes up as little as 8 to 13% of the total powder in the sachet. In a standard 12.5 gram sachet, that means you might only be getting around 1 to 1.5 grams of actual coffee. The remaining 87 to 92% of the product is a combination of sugars, dairy or plant-based fats, stabilizers, and thickeners designed to simulate the mouthfeel of real frothed milk. This brings us to the nutritional reality hidden inside these convenient packets. A single serving of a standard flavored sachet can easily contain anywhere from 3 to 7 grams of sugar. When you calculate that by weight, many of these products are over 50% sugar. You are effectively paying premium coffee prices for a cup of hot flavored sugar water, with a splash of whitener and a caffeine kick. The illusion of quality in these products is heavily relied on a specific phrase allowed under food labeling laws, natural flavor. To a consumer, this sounds reassuring. It implies that the vanilla, caramel, or hazelnut note in your mug was extracted directly from a plant. Mechanically, however, the legal definitions of natural flavor are incredibly broad. They simply mean the flavoring agent was derived from a biological source rather than a completely synthetic petroleum base. It tells you absolutely nothing about the intensive chemical processing used to isolate that flavor, nor does it mean the flavor came from the actual ingredient pictured on the box. Legally, a manufacturer can use complex laboratory distillations from wood pulp or bacterial fermentation, add it to a mix of palm oil and corn syrup, and still market the final result as a natural, cafe-style blend. It is a masterclass in ingredient dilution. By shifting the product from pure coffee to a multi-ingredient powder formulation, brands can cut down the usage of actual coffee beans to a bare fraction of a percentage, replacing them with incredibly cheap bulk fillers while charging a premium for convenience. If branded products can hide this much, what about the ones with no brand reputation to protect? Walk down the coffee aisle at any major supermarket and you will see a row of generic house brand jars sitting right next to the famous name brands. Many of them even feature sleek, elegant labels with words like Premium Select, Classic Gold, or Barista Blend. They cost a fraction of the price, leading a lot of people to assume they are just getting a great deal on a comparable product. But the mechanism behind how these private label jars actually end up on shelves reveals a completely different reality. Supermarkets do not own coffee roasting facilities or bean plantations. Instead, they operate on a tender system. When a grocery chain wants to stock its house brand instant coffee, it sends out a contract specification to third-party manufacturers worldwide. These commercial suppliers bid on the contract, and in the vast majority of cases, the lowest bidder wins. The contract might last for a year, 6 months, or even just a single production run. Because of this system, the coffee inside that generic jar can change completely from one batch to the next without the label ever changing. A jar bought in January might contain cheap Robusta beans processed in South America, while a jar bought in June could be filled with entirely different surplus beans sourced from Southeast Asia. The only requirement the manufacturer has to meet is that the final powder or granule looks right, dissolves in water, and fits the absolute baseline profile agreed upon in the contract. When it comes to quality control, supermarkets focus almost entirely on regulatory food safety rather than premium flavor. Testing protocols are designed to check for basic compliance, ensuring there are no harmful levels of mold, moisture, or foreign contaminants. Beyond meeting those legal safety thresholds, there is no rigorous evaluation of roast freshness, flavor nuance, or bean defects. You're essentially buying whatever surplus coffee could be bought and processed for the absolute lowest price at that specific moment in time. Now here's the one that should hurt the most, because it markets itself as the ethical choice. Walk down the organic aisle of any supermarket and you will find a specific category of coffee that commands a serious price premium. The packaging is beautiful, usually earthy, matte textured bags covered in official-looking stamps, certification seals, and evocative stories about small-scale family cooperatives. When you buy it, you aren't just buying caffeine. You're buying peace of mind. You feel good about putting it in your cart because the implication is crystal clear. Because it's ethical and because it's organic, it must be a superior product. But when you strip away the branding and put these coffees into blind taste tests, a bizarre pattern emerges. Time and again, these highly marketed, ethically focused brands rank lower than standard, mid-tier commercial blends. They frequently score poorly with tasting panels, who note issues like flat flavor profiles, excessive sourness, or an unpleasantly grassy aftertaste. This creates a massive disconnect for consumers, but the explanation makes perfect sense once you look at what these certifications actually measure. The USDA Organic Seal, for example, is entirely about agricultural inputs. It mandates that the coffee must be grown without synthetic fertilizers, irradiation, or prohibited pesticides, and requires strict soil management practices. Fair trade certifications focus on supply chain ethics, ensuring farmers receive a minimum price floor to protect them against market volatility. What neither of these certifications measures, even slightly, is flavor or quality control post-harvest. Growing coffee organically is incredibly difficult. Without synthetic interventions, crops are far more vulnerable to pests like the coffee berry borer and devastating diseases like coffee leaf rust. When a farm is hit by these issues, the physical quality of the surviving beans can degrade significantly, leading to uneven ripening and defects. Yet, because the farm maintained organic practices, those beans still receive the certified organic stamp. Furthermore, many of these brands rely on vague, single origin labeling. While single origin sounds prestigious, it simply means the coffee came from one country or region. It doesn't mean it came from a good farm or a high-scoring microlot. A brand can legally source lower-grade, defect-heavy beans from a single massive region, secure an organic certification, and market it as a premium health and ethics product. Essentially, you are paying a premium for how the plant was treated in the ground, not how the final brew tastes in your cup. It's an uncomfortable reality for anyone trying to shop consciously, proving that good intentions don't automatically translate to a clean roast. And that brings us to a parallel problem. If the ethical choice can disappoint you, so can the legacy brand you've trusted for decades, without you even realizing that the entire product changed right under your nose. If you have a favorite brand of instant coffee, one you've been buying for years, maybe even decades, there is a quiet shift happening in the grocery aisles that you need to watch out for. It usually starts with a vague, unsettling feeling. You open a fresh jar, brew your morning cup exactly the same way you always do, but the taste is slightly off. It feels thinner, maybe a bit more acidic, or lacking that familiar, rich aroma. Your immediate instinct is to assume you just got a bad batch, or that maybe your taste buds are having an off day. But if you start tracking the customer review timelines for some of Australia's most established legacy coffee brands, you will notice hundreds of other shoppers experiencing the exact same off day at the precise same time. What you are actually witnessing is the phenomenon of silent product reformulation. Food and beverage companies reformulate their products constantly, usually driven by shifting raw material costs, supply chain disruptions, or corporate directives to maximize profit margins. When it comes to instant coffee, This typically means quietly altering the blend, perhaps substituting a portion of high-quality Arabica beans with cheaper, more bitter Robusta beans, or adjusting the roasting and freeze-drying metrics to speed up production. The most frustrating part for consumers is how entirely legal and unannounced this process is. Under Australian consumer law and food standards, a company is under no obligation to put a giant warning label on the front of the jar stating that the recipe has changed, as long as the package accurately reflects the weight, country of origin percentages, and basic allergen or ingredient requirements, which, for instant coffee, simply reads 100% coffee. They can completely overhaul the flavor profile without saying a word. The packaging looks identical, the price stays the same, but the product inside has been fundamentally downgraded. When consumers do notice the change and flood the brand's social media or customer service lines with complaints, corporate response patterns follow a remarkably predictable script. They will issue polite, boilerplate statements thanking you for your feedback, reassuring you that they take quality seriously, and occasionally suggesting that they have updated their process to enhance the flavor profile. It is a masterclass in corporate gaslighting, designed to make you think the problem is your palate, not their cost-cutting. As a consumer, your recourse is incredibly limited. You cannot force a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate to change its recipe back through an angry email. Your only real power is brand disloyalty voting with your wallet and walking away. But this brings us right back to that ownership detail we touched on earlier. You might decide to punish your favorite legacy brand for ruining its flavor by switching to a completely different jar on the shelf, thinking you are supporting a competitor. The reality? Because a tiny handful of massive parent corporations own almost the entire aisle, you are very likely just pouring your money right back into the exact same corporate pockets. You haven't escaped the system. You've just selected a different label from the same global supply chain. Two brands left, and they represent two completely different kinds of disguise. If you look at the flavored coffee sachet aisle, the marketing relies heavily on replicating the local cafe experience. The boxes feature high-definition images of frothy mugs, dusted with cocoa powder, promising a quick, elegant vanilla latte or a rich cappuccino at a fraction of the price of a barista-made coffee. It is positioned as the ultimate convenience. Just add hot water and you have a cafe-style drink. But if you turn that box around and check the ingredients list, a very different picture emerges. In food manufacturing, ingredients must be listed in order of their weight, from highest to lowest. On almost every major brand of these convenience blends, coffee is not the first ingredient. It isn't even the second. Instead, you almost always find sugar and vegetable oils or glucose syrups occupying the top spots. The actual coffee content, usually listed as soluble instant coffee powder, frequently makes up as little as 8 to 12% of the total sachet. When you break down the nutritional panel, these drinks function far more like a liquid dessert than a morning pick-me-up. A single sachet can easily contain 2 to 3 teaspoons of sugar, coupled with hidden saturated fats used to create that synthetic, creamy mouthfeel. In fact, on a gram-for-gram basis, comparing the sugar and fat content of some of these flavored lattes to a standard chocolate biscuit or a serving of soft drink reveals a surprising reality. You are essentially drinking a highly processed, sugar-forward beverage with just enough coffee flavor thrown in to justify the branding. Which brings us to the brand with the biggest gap between what it costs, what it implies, and what's actually in the jar. We have finally reached the #1 spot on our countdown. The absolute peak. The brand with the most recognizable logo on the planet, the strongest global reputation, and a premium price tag that practically demands respect. You see this name on nearly every major city block, and naturally you assume that level of prestige translates to the highest quality in your cup. But when you strip away the marketing, remove the familiar green sirens and the fancy packaging, and put the coffee itself to the test, the results are genuinely shocking. In independent, blind taste tests conducted by food critics and coffee experts, the world's most famous premium cafe brand consistently scores at the bottom. When reviewers don't know what they are drinking, they routinely rank budget supermarket staples brands that cost a fraction of the price per 100 grams far above the global giant. You are paying top dollar for the prestige, but the actual taste regularly loses to inexpensive corner store tins. How does a company build an absolute empire on coffee that loses to budget alternatives? It comes down to a process known in the industry as the dark roast masking technique. When you are a global conglomerate buying millions of tons of coffee beans from all over the world, those beans are naturally going to have drastically different flavor profiles. Some will be excellent, some will be mediocre, and some will be lower grade. But global chains rely on absolute consistency. A customer in New York expects their cup to taste exactly the same as a customer in Tokyo. To achieve that uniformity on a massive scale, the company roasts their beans incredibly dark. They roast them past the point of caramelization, right to the edge of being burnt. This aggressive roasting burns away the delicate, complex, and unique flavors of the bean itself, replacing it with a heavy, bitter, uniform taste. It completely masks the imperfections of lower-grade beans because the dark roast profile dominates everything else. You aren't tasting the origin or the quality of the coffee. You are simply tasting the roast. That intense burnt bitterness creates another massive problem, which you see immediately in their ready-to-drink products. If you look at the nutritional label on those chilled glass bottles or cans sold in grocery stores, the numbers are staggering. Because the base coffee is so inherently bitter, the company has to drown it in sweeteners to make it palatable. A standard ready-to-drink bottle from the leading chain routinely packs around 40 to 50 grams of sugar. Put that in perspective, the American Heart Association recommends an absolute maximum of 36 grams of added sugar in the entire day for men, and just 25 grams for women. One bottle shatters your daily limit. Waverita Coffee. You are paying a massive premium for a famous logo. But what you're actually buying is low-tier, over-roasted coffee masquerading as luxury, submerged in enough sugar to classify it as a dessert. So if the priciest, most famous option isn't the answer, what actually is? Epicurious, supermarket coffee blind taste test by experts. This video features professional coffee experts conducting blind taste tests on various grocery store coffee brands, proving that expensive global names often fall short when compared to more affordable options once the influence of marketing is removed. YouTube after uncovering how manufacturers mask ingredient dilution and manipulate beans. Looking at the massive wall of glass jars in a supermarket can feel overwhelming. It seems like you need a degree in food science just to avoid getting ripped off. But cut through all the marketing buzzwords. The gold foil, the promises of barista-style richness, the vague claims of premium quality, and there is actually one simple foolproof heuristic you can use immediately to judge any jar on the shelf. Look at the back label and check for the explicit disclosure of the bean type. It sounds almost too simple, but this single checkpoint acts as an immediate filter for transparency. In the coffee industry, transparency is directly tied to quality. Higher-end producers who use 100% Arabica beans want you to know it because Arabica is more expensive, smoother, and vastly superior in flavor complexity. They will proudly print 100% Arabica on the packaging. If a jar simply lists its ingredients as 100% pure coffee or soluble coffee powder without specifying the exact species of bean, you can safely assume it is a mask for cost reduction. Manufacturers use this vague terminology to protect their supply chains, allowing them to quietly substitute cheap, bitter Robusta beans or lower-grade filler crops depending on market fluctuations. They are legally permitted to hide behind generic descriptions, and if they aren't bragging about what is inside the jar, it is almost always because the truth won't flatter them. Unlike fresh whole beans, instant coffee in Australian retail almost never features a roast date. Because it is a highly processed, dehydrated, shelf-stable product, you are left completely in the dark about when the actual agricultural product was harvested or roasted. This lack of transparency makes the bean disclosure rule even more critical. When a brand takes the extra step to specify not just the bean type, but the specific country or region of origin, it tells you they are trying to preserve a distinct flavor profile rather than just selling you a generic hit of caffeine. By using this single rule, you instantly shift the power dynamic in the supermarket aisle. You stop guessing and you stop letting the graphic design on the front of the jar dictate your perception of what's inside. It converts that built-up frustration into immediate, actionable empowerment. You can pick up a jar, flip it around, and know within 3 seconds exactly what kind of game the manufacturer is playing. Now let's put that rule to work. Here's what actually passed. If you're going to keep drinking instant coffee, you might as well buy something that actually tastes like coffee rather than a burnt chemical byproduct. Fortunately, you don't have to spend a fortune to get something decent. Independent testing shows a massive performance gap between the bottom tier jars and the select few that get it right. To find the best alternatives, independent consumer groups like Choice Australia have run comprehensive blind taste tests, stacking supermarket brands against professional barista standards. The results reveal that a few options consistently outperform the rest, largely because of how they are manufactured. Most low-grade instant coffee relies on spray drying, a process where brewed liquid is blasted with intense hot air to rapidly evaporate the moisture. The problem is that this heat also destroys up to 80% of the coffee's natural volatile aromatics, leaving behind a flat, bitter powder. The better alternative is freeze drying. This method freezes the coffee concentrate and uses a vacuum chamber to vaporize the ice through sublimation. Because it completely avoids high heat, freeze drying locks in nearly all of the bean's original flavor complexity. If you are looking for the absolute best budget option, the data points directly to ALDI's Alcafe Gold. In independent blind tastings, this sub $4 jar managed to land a 79% satisfaction score, tying with organic options triple its price and easily beating out premium household names. It uses a reliable freeze-dried process to deliver a remarkably balanced, medium roast flavor profile without the harsh synthetic bitterness found in standard cheap tins. For those who want to prioritize sourcing transparency and ethical farming, the top recommendation is Coles Organic Freeze-Dried. It matches the high scores of the premium tier while ensuring the beans are fully certified organic and fair trade. It provides a clean, clear taste with a mild acidity that proves you don't have to sacrifice ethical standards to get a reliable morning cup. If you just want the best all-around option available on supermarket shelves, the clear winner is Victoria Mountain Grown Freeze-Dried. Made from 100% Arabica beans, it secured a massive 80% expert rating from Scholz, actually outscoring a standard espresso shot made from freshly ground beans in blind testing. It offers a smooth, dark chocolate aroma and a well-rounded body that genuinely mimics a traditional cafe brew. And if you're willing to go one step further, there's an even better option most people overlook. If you want a better cup of coffee, but have absolutely zero desire to turn your kitchen into a high-tech science lab, you don't need to buy an expensive espresso machine or a complex pour-over setup. There is a simple zero-equipment step you can take right now to instantly upgrade your morning routine. The easiest bridge between the convenience of instant coffee and the quality of a specialty brew is the specialty coffee bag. Think of it exactly like a tea bag, but filled with freshly ground, high-quality coffee beans instead of tea leaves. Companies like Toby's Estate, Coffee Supreme, and several other prominent Australian specialty roasters have heavily invested in this space, offering single-serve drip filter bags and steep bags containing proper filter blends. You just place the bag in your mug, add hot water, let it steep or drip through, and throw the bag away. There are no grinders to clean, no paper filters to wet, and no expensive gear taking up counter space. It gives you the exact convenience profile of instant coffee, but with the flavor dynamics of a real cafe brew. If you're willing to take just one small step further, the single best thing you can do for your morning routine is to bypass the supermarket aisles entirely and order directly from a local specialty roaster. When you buy coffee from a massive commercial brand, you are largely paying for the prestige of the label and the real estate it occupies on the shelf. With specialty coffee, you are paying for the care put into the sourcing and roasting. More importantly, local roasters give you access to something commercial brands rarely offer: transparency. When you look at a bag of specialty coffee, the most critical piece of information on the label isn't the brand name or the marketing catchphrases, it's the roast date. Coffee is an agricultural product, and experts understand that roasted beans hit their peak flavor window between 7 and 21 days after roasting. After a month or two, those delicate, volatile flavor compounds begin to dissipate, leaving you with a flat, bitter cup. Commercial supermarket coffees often sit in warehouses and on shelves for months, which is why they frequently taste stale. Local roasters, on the other hand, typically roast in small batches and print the exact day the beans left the roaster right on the packaging. Finding a great local roaster is incredibly straightforward. You can start by checking the bags of coffee used at your favorite local cafe, or simply do a quick search for specialty roasters in your immediate area. Many of them offer highly flexible subscription services that deliver freshly roasted beans or pre-ground bags directly to your door on a schedule that matches your consumption. You don't have to change your entire lifestyle to experience better coffee. The next time you run out of your usual blend, skip the supermarket trip. Order a small pack of specialty drip bags or a fresh bag of filter ground coffee from a local independent roaster instead. Taste it side by side with what you normally drink and notice the difference when the coffee in your mug is actually fresh.